Well, hello, my lovely learning designers. How are you today? My name is Anna Sabramowicz. Welcome to my channel. Let's talk about scenarios today. Now, earlier in the week, what I did is I posted a walkthrough video of Connect with Haji Kamal. And after I posted it, obviously a lot of people had just these amazing memories about how they first saw it, because it's almost over a decade old now, and how much it inspired them, how much they enjoyed it. Now, what's really cool is that some people, when I shared it, that was the first time that I had ever seen it. And so it inspired their work. They're now excited about doing those kinds of experiences. Now, if you are somebody who is excited about crafting scenarios, sees their value, that's fantastic. In this video, what I wanted to do is go under the hood, and if you really want to start getting really good at writing and designing and launching these kinds of experiences, what I wanted to do is maybe take a little bit of that glitz and glamour off of the top of it, look at the framework underneath. I'm going to be walking through how you can take something that maybe feels a little bit overwhelming and complicated if this is the first time you're trying to do it, and not only distill it for, would you actually craft something like this? So I'm going to walk you through my thought process and a sample example that I'm going to be doing, but also these kinds of scenarios, where would you use them? Where would they be valuable if you're trying to pitch this to stakeholders and actually launch this in your organization? So for some of you, you might be like, Anna, I'm good, I got this. But for some of you, you might want to get awesome at scenarios. Therefore, this is probably going to be an awesome video for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, if you enjoy these kinds of topics and enjoy this kind of in-depth walkthrough for your work, so that you can apply this in your work, make sure you subscribe and make sure you share with somebody who you think would actually benefit from this kind of experience. But without further ado, let's get started. Okay. So first off, the two things that I'm going to be and if this doesn't really work for me today, that's okay. I'm just going to let it be. So the things that we're going to talk about today is really the first thing, when are we going to use this kind of scenario, this kind of format, and how are we going to use this? And I made myself a whole bunch of notes because there's details I don't want to forget. And also, I'm really trying to do this visual communication with you in the whiteboard. And it's harder than I thought, because I thought everything would look really beautiful. So I have to work hard to make this go. So bear with me. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be focusing on scenarios, but so my inspiration here is Connect with Haji Kamal. I'm just going to put that here for us. And if you haven't seen it yet, or you need to reintroduce yourself to it, check out the video. I will post it in the links underneath the video so that you can check it out there. So Connect with Haji Kamal is the inspiration. It was my inspiration. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is so cool. I want to do things like this. But unfortunately, a lot of people look at it and get completely befuddled about how are they going to even get started with that. So what I want you to do is maybe walk with me. I'll take you down a little path of how to think about these things initially, because that will take a lot of the complexity away from it. And maybe what you can do is use the elements of this without having to go all full-on comic book style and complexity on one page. Okay, so that's really what I'm planning to do here, is show you how to think about these things so that you can borrow the pieces that make sense for your context and your learners and your organization. So when to use these experiences, that's what I'm going to talk about first, and then how are we going to do that. So these are just the ways that I would think about it. Okay, so let's say that you have a task or a process, and people are making mistakes while they're executing this task or or going through this process. So that's one piece. One of the things that I want you to consider is that by the time we get here, we've already realized that scenarios are a good option and are really going to help people do this. And I think it's kind of chicken and egg. You have to know some of the opportunities for when a scenario is a good fit in order for you to rule it out of the conversation if necessary. So here I'm going to talk about that. So let's say that I think a good place to use a scenario if the task or process is not being done well is if the people in your audience are varied. And when I say varied, I mean that they come in with varied levels of experience. And so if they do, then the scenario could be an opportunity for them to all go through the same experience. So you could have people who are senior and junior, and you're trying to get them all on the same page. Well, a scenario about the task and the process would be helpful, because then you would all have the same idea to talk to. So another place you would probably enjoy using a scenario, and it would add a lot of value, and you would enjoy it. I know I said that, but that's the truth. I enjoy scenarios. It is if the mistakes are costly. And it's funny because I'll talk to people and they'll be like, you know what, we have this task and this process, and I wouldn't do scenarios because we only have the one way of doing things. Because and then if you execute it, and I was talking to somebody who does training for, they do training for the people that go up the poles that hold the electricity, and they're like, well, we don't want them to do scenarios because there's only one way to do things, and if you don't, then you die. And I was like, that's actually an amazing space for us to do scenarios, because when people die, that means they've made a mistake, right? Terrible. Or most times probably they get hurt, something gets burnt, like imagine that. So if the mistakes are costly, and here we're talking about life or death, just like in Haji Kamal, we really were talking about life or death. Creating allegiances during war, wartime is life or death. So that's why scenario is actually a great place for that, if you want people to practice making these mistakes in a safe place. There's another piece that I think is important. If the task and process is where there's nuance, and what I mean by that is, if, let's say, even after you have really good guides and performance support, but it's almost like you get to make those decisions still based on looking at things that are not necessarily outlined in the process. So people who are more experienced in the process, who have seen maybe more of those pieces or those situations over time, they're actually able to make better decisions. And so guess what? They're not, like, if you want people to suffer through that and have the customers suffer through making poor decisions, you can do that. But what if you could put together several of these situations that actually represent making those decisions based on that nuance? And that happens, it doesn't have to be with customers, it can be personal communication a lot of times, where, you know, things like bias or things like assumptions or experience come into play, good or bad, and then you want to outline them in a way that helps people make those mistakes and those decisions, and see, even if they're applying those strategies like the performance support pieces, let's say a job aid, that there is still more to be done, more thinking to be done, and they learn the patterns over time to recognize certain things. Let's say another one is, okay, so we've got the varied, they're from all over the place, mistakes are costly, there's nuance to the decisions. Here's another one. What if you have great performance support? And by great performance support, I mean you could have amazing software that supports people to make great customer interactions. You know, everything's laid out well. They have job aids, they have tools, everything is awesome. So they have all this great stuff that supports their work, but they still make errors, mistakes. And you're like, okay, well, you know, if everything is awesome, how come people still make mistakes? What's happening there? This is a great piece to do with a scenario, and an interactive story is actually amazing for this. So, and I interchange these things because what I want you to think about is that sometimes a scenario alone is not enough. You have to actually, the nuance that you add to a scenario, like we saw in Haji Kamal, is that we are actually helping somebody else make decisions because they have a goal. And those things are not inherent in scenarios, they're inherent in interactive stories that mix the two together. Okay, so we've got all these things, okay, and there's more. Obviously, there's more reasons why you'd use an interactive story in scenarios, but let's say this is it. So then how do we do this, right? If one of the things we talked about in Connect with Haji Kamal is that when the experience was launched, what they initially launched it for is so that people could go through it, whether they had ever been deployed to Afghanistan or not. But now they had a common experience, and they came in with that common experience to have that something as a starting point for a discussion. Great. Now everybody's on the same page, and they can talk to the same thing without going, oh, you've never felt this way, or you've never experienced this. Now you have a common ground, which is really cool for live sessions, or even when you're having like even Zoom discussions or brainstorming sessions. Everybody now is starting off from the same place. It's an amazing set of homework, right? Mistakes are costly, obviously. So here, this could be, when I'm saying this, is you can deploy ahead of time. The reason I laughed is because it was all like a military thing, and I thought deploy, that'd be kind of cool. Deploy ahead. Oh, did I already write that? Yes, see? That's what happens. Woohoo! All right, deploy ahead of time. So people get the chance, experience it ahead of time before they come to your session, maybe, or before the real training happens. If mistakes are costly, this is cool. You can figure out which situations are the most costly, and then create 10 or 12, whatever scenarios just around those situations, and have people practice over and over and over and over again. An example of this is something like broken coworker. The mistakes aren't as costly. They're costly to your psyche, and basically how broken coworker is about emotional intelligence. But what we wanted to do there is say, okay, well, if he's been dealing with a bully, we're just going to give him like 6 scenarios where he does the same thing over and over. Is experience what it's like being attacked by a bully, and how does he respond. And that is where you can really, and nobody minded having that pressure on, because that's what we're there to practice. So imagine if you have a situation where a lot of people make mistakes. Boom, here we are. Let's give them 6 that are about the same thing. It's just in different context, and have them pick up those patterns. And that's what would happen here as well. If people have everything that's happening it's not clear cut. There are some gray areas. There are some nuances where you have to make fine decisions, and it only comes from experience. This is a fabulous place to use scenarios, and go for it. Create 6 that are really the same thing, but they help people see those patterns that maybe senior people would only now really, they probably even couldn't verbalize it. You know how people become really competent at something and they can't really tell you exactly why or how it's working? Well, now you can bake that into the scenarios and the situations that you're presenting to your learner. And then this one's really interesting. What if everything is awesome and people still make mistakes? Well, this could be something like people don't believe that they have to apply these strategies. They don't see the consequences of those, of the mistakes that they make. Maybe they don't follow protocols, and they don't latch something because they don't think it's important, because even though the performance support says make sure you latch this and the sticker's right on there, but they don't do it because they don't think it's important. And 6 months later somebody walks by, and because something wasn't latched, they get crushed by the contents inside. Well, what your interactive story can do is actually show people the consequences of those actions in a condensed amount of time, because sometimes what happens is we're so far removed from the actual consequence of our actions that we don't make the connection unless it's become explicit for us in some way. So we're basically able to connect the dots for people by making things super immediate. I mean, I could say 6 months later, look, Jim died because you didn't latch this thing. Now I'm going to think about it a little bit differently. So we're not only here helping people identify some of their personal gaps, but also helping them see what could happen in the future based on either positive or negative actions that are maybe too far removed. So I hope that's like a good preamble to this. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty mechanics of what we saw in Connect with Haji Kamal. By the way, are you having fun so far? If you are, you better subscribe and share and like, because that lets me know that you are having fun and that I should make more of these. Okay, so now let's talk about this framework. Okay, so if you really underneath, let me just sketch this out. Oh yeah, would help if I wasn't using the eraser. So, so here is like, if you look at it from like the big picture overview of what what you saw on the screen as you went through the interactive story, Connect with Haji Kamal. You had a kind of like a problem here. And when I say problem, I mean it's just like a situation you need to solve. And then what you had, and this was very consistent, is advice from dude 1, and then you'd get advice from dude 2, and then you'd listen to it, consider it, and then you'd say, what do you do now? And then you have these options. And the options were usually, if you paid attention, the first, one of the options would be based on the advice that this dude gave you. Another one of the options would be based on the advice that this dude gave you. And then another one would be maybe something novel and interesting. And these dudes were interchangeably right. Sometimes this guy had good advice, sometimes this guy did. And basically, if you look at this from kind of like a 30,000-foot view, you have this question that you're posing. It's a scenario-based questions. When you say scenario-based questions, it's contextual. When somebody looks at it, like when these soldiers who were, this was designed for this activity, when they looked at it, one of the things they were probably saying is like, oh man, yeah, I could see myself in this situation. So that's really what we're looking for. We're not making up stuff. These questions and everything is pulled from people who are actually doing stuff in the field. So for you, it might be people who are like accountants or salespeople or nurses, whatever, right? It's from your context. It's people who drill for oil. I don't know. Context is key here. So we have a question, and basically we're saying, hey, here's the situation. How would you solve it? How would you solve it? Now, here's what's pretty interesting. We're saying, how would you solve it? But we're not saying you. We're saying in this situation, and especially when we're doing interactive stories, one of the things we're doing is we're telling a story of a character, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, how would you help? And this was Lieutenant Harrell in that story. Lieutenant Harrell is the protagonist. He's the hero of that interactive story. And so when we're being asked how would we solve it, we're actually being asked for Lieutenant Harrell, how would we actually help him address the situation? We're an advisor. And that distance is actually really important because if somebody is hesitant about learning about your thing, or they're already pretty stuck and ingrained in their ways, which is like 99% of us, we already think we're doing, we already know how things are supposed to work and everything is hunky-dory. So why, don't mess with my system. So right now what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to basically be awesome for Lieutenant Harrell and give him really good advice. So the question is, here's the situation. How would you solve it if you were helping Lieutenant Harrell? How should he handle it? That's great. Okay, we could leave it there. But what Connect with Haji Kamal did is they used this fabulous strategy here I call it contagonist distractor. Now, the contagonist distractor, and I call it a distractor because you will be presented with 3 options. 3 is good. 3 is actually, from what I hear, and the research says that 3 options is actually optimal. Not too many, doesn't distract you too much, lets you think, and all 3 of these should be extremely, these options should be extremely tempting for somebody to choose. And they become even more tempting after somebody hears the rationale behind why you should choose A or B or C. So these serve as our distractors because I may have already been really clear about how I was going to solve the situation, but then all of a sudden, Lieutenant Ramos jumps in and says, well, what about this? Have you considered this? This is a fabulous way for you to add complexity to something that somebody thought would be very straight cut. It also, when we talked about how sometimes people come in and there's nuance. Sometimes we feel very confident as novices about making a certain decision, but if you really consider the nuance, might not be so easy. And so these guys here are sharing that nuance and sharing their inner bias, sharing their inner doubt, all those things and emotions all the things that contribute to our decision making. We might say we're super robots, we're super rational, but we are not. And that is why also when there's great procedures and everything is super clear, people in some cases still make mistakes. And that's what we're addressing here. Is they might say, yeah, but this is not the way we do things now. That's not the new procedure. But then this guy might say, yeah, but the old procedure works so well. Why would you change it? It's just a management thing. So there's so many things that you could say here, and really they become the dialogue that somebody has, in their own head, and we're just kind of externalizing it and saying these are your advisors. Now, so this contagonist distractor is a very cool strategy. Now, the thing is that these are all elements that you pull in to your scenario design as you are exploring the context through which you're trying to solve this problem. So there are places where the contagonist distractor won't fit, and it's not necessary. And one of the things you want to do is, if you do decide to go with a contagonist distractor, it's as a result of something that you saw that would really add depth to those questions and that strategy, because maybe you discovered when you're talking to subject matter experts and practitioners is that there is a lot of clear-cut processes, but it's emotions and rationalizations that get in the way of good decision making. Boom, that's a fantastic strategy to use a contagonist distractor for. And so one of the other things we saw with Haji Kamal and all good games and interactive stories and simulations is that there is a consistent user experience. We get a problem, we get the advice of these two guys. Lieutenant Harrell asks us, what should we do? You get options, and then you see the consequences of those options every single time. The reason we do this is good design, and we do this because it also helps our learners forget about how to work this and figure out how this is going to work mechanically, and they can get lost in the story. Patterns are good for people. Patterns create simplicity, comfort, and then they help us to get lost in that experience, because we're no longer trying to figure out what to click. There's no more, that novelty goes away. What happens is we get lost in what they're saying and why they're saying it, and then how we make those decisions, and then what happens as a result of those decisions, right? So you could look at this and be like, oh man, but then I got to build this screen that has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Guess what? You don't. You absolutely don't. But you could still follow this framework. I mean, listen, you can make this work on paper. And guess what? With Connect with Haji Kamal, when I watched a presentation by the Connection Studios that designed Connect with Haji Kamal, I forget the name of the lead, the CEO there. My apologies. But one of the things that he said is that people really, the soldiers really enjoyed these problems, but they also wanted to solve them as a team, because that's what they do in the field instead of working on them by themselves. So guess what? He took this and he turned it into a paper-based experience where they actually work through the scenarios, and one person's kind of the moderator and reveals things. So you can do the same. But also the other thing you can do is, I want you to think about that this is just one way of sharing this information, and it doesn't have to be this complicated, because let's be honest, trying to make it work like this, it's difficult because there's so many constraints. So if this is your first scenario and interactive experience like this, I'd say look at the model, but you can do it in a much simpler way. So really, you can do it like this. Okay, so I came up with a little scenario for y'all because I just wanted to kind of maybe step away a bit from the military experience and maybe just give you some more ideas. But I'm not going to use anything silly. I'm going to use real life situations, because I think those then you can kind of contextualize it a bit better, rather than I was using like leprechauns or something, right? Okay, so let's say my goal with my scenario is to, what did I put here? Oh yeah, help people make, let's say help people make better, healthy decisions for snacks at the store. So I don't know if there is an e-learning, for this, but I think there really should be. So if this inspires you to make your own awesome demo of basically how somebody should make healthy decisions for snacks at the store, go for it. Like, these ideas are out there, because one of the things I'm thinking is it should be helpful to somebody. That's one of the things we were talking about with Broken Coworker, Connected with Haji Kamal, and the other ones that I'm going to share with you over the next, forever, is that these pieces, the reason they're so influential is because people actually get lost in them, because they have a beginning, middle, and end. They're actually a full-on experience. So once you go through that, and it's so immersive, and you actually get value from it because it makes you think, it makes you look up other stuff, that is something that is so inspirational that you just want to do it for other people. So I think that that's a part of it for me. Okay, so we're just going to focus on how you would do kind of like this a la Haji Kamal kind of thing, but let's say in a much simpler way. You just, as far as I'm concerned, all you have to do is, to make this super simple, is just lay it out in the sequence that you want people to experience this in. Because if you think about what you have here on this page, it's modeled after a comic book. And a comic book, and it even reveals itself in a way that you're controlling the journey. You're controlling where people's eyes go and what they see and in what sequence. That's why strategically, when you go to Connect with Haji Kamal, first you see the problem. Then once you've read that, then you click the next arrow, and then you see what these guys say. And then you get, so it moves you through that way. Well, guess what? You're doing the same thing for yourself, but you're just using the same elements. You're just laying them out differently. So if I was doing this, even on if I was doing this, let's say I was doing this in Storyline and I was using the slides, and I didn't want to have to build this complicated thing that reveals triggers and all this stuff, what I would do is I would craft it this way. So I love it because this is all, it can be so simple, but we're using the same elements. So let's say first one is we have the problem, right? And for me, if we're doing this to me is one beat. For me, a beat is just a really the play out of one decision, how it plays out. So the beat is Jane is, okay, so Jane is at the, and we can write this out. Jane is at the supermarket, and where should she go to get a good snack? Jane. Where to go at the supermarket. So that's the situation. And now you're coming up with your own ideas, like where should you go to get a great snack at the supermarket? Where should you go? And so maybe this is her friend James. And James says, well, obviously you should go to the organics. So, and he goes his spiel. Like, you could do this in voiceover if you want to, but really this could all just be text, right? This could just be like a question. So, and I could write it in a dialogue saying, Jane says, where do I go? Where do I go? I can do this. Where do I go? And then James says, organics. Advice. He's my first contagonist distractor. And then we get a second set of advice. And maybe this person is Kelly. And Kelly says, you go to the snack aisle. They have good low-fat snacks, and you don't want to be a tyrant to yourself, because you will never stick to it if you're a tyrant to yourself. And one of the things that you could do is, instead of just them giving reasons, you could go back to James. And James might say, yeah, but then you get distracted with all the other bad stuff, bad distractions. I mean, really, you could see this playing out, right? Distractions. Bad distractions. And then maybe Kelly has one more thing to add. Kelly says, yeah, but that's not sustainable. Maybe it's just like, she goes, baby steps. Baby steps. you're overdoing it, James. Too harsh. And then the next screen is, what do you do? And then you have the options. And the options, so we have the same kind of layout, but we're doing it in screens, right? And like realistically, when you think about it, what do you do? And then as is with all really good scenarios, you don't go, that's a great choice. No, you go, okay, well, so I have screens. 3 options could lead to 3 different consequences. If I'm playing illusion of choice, I might have 2 of those go to the same thing. But for the sake of awesomeness, we're just going to say, okay, each one of these options, 1, 2, and 3, is going to go to a different screen here for my consequence. And the consequence always has to be what happened as a result of that. So if I chose, let's say I chose, he said organics. Okay, so I chose, let's say, apples. I go to the organics, and let's say this option would be organics. And then this would be snacks, and then maybe here would be deli. And so I see, choose to go to the organic section. The consequence, I'm going to call it C, the consequence would be Jean picked up a bunch of apples, and then later she was so hungry she ended up eating chips. So not so good. Then she went to the snack aisle and she got some low-fat bars, and what happened is that she ate the whole box. Not a good outcome. And then maybe she went to the deli, and if she went to the deli, she got some goat cheese and ham, and that was a great snack, and she didn't cheat. Whatever, right? Maybe this is actually she chose something else. None of them said that, but now it gives you an idea. Everything that James is saying and everything that Kelly's saying, those are the things that would run, the rationalizations that would run through my head as I'm trying to make a good decision. I really think somebody should build this. But what you should do is build like, a full experience where at the end it actually, maybe Jean makes some good decisions and sees the outcome of that, but not right away, maybe in a couple of months, right? Where she actually is like, I've been making good decisions. Look, these pants fit again. I can breathe. Who knows? So what I wanted to show you is that there's this simplicity here, but there's other things that you should think about when it comes to simplicity. This, if you look at the design of this, we could just really have 2 screens as well, right? When you're designing this, you have 2 screens. There's a screen with a person and text on the side, and there's James, text on the side, Kelly, text on the side. So as far as your design goes, super minimalist. So you have this one type of screen, and then you have a second type of screen. The other second type of screen is what do you do, which is the option screen. And then the option screen is just a big juicy, what do you do? 3 options. Guess what? Your consequences could be Jane having the dialogue beside her going, I ate all those apples and I still was hungry and then I binged on chips. And here it's Jane going, oh, I ate the whole box of low-fat bars. And then here she could say, Jean, oh my gosh, that goat cheese and ham was so satisfying. I actually didn't need to eat anything else. Boom. And then we go into the next scenario, which is the second beat. And basically the next time that Jean needs to make a difficult decision in regard to, snacks at the store. Maybe she's, doing something else, or maybe she needs to cook something. Who knows? You get my drift. So what I wanted you to consider is that if you're trying to model this, trying to do this all at once the first time, it's difficult because you all of a sudden have to realize that you are a comic book designer at the same time as you're a UI designer, at the same time as you're a learning designer, and this is pretty complex. So the problem with a lot of these projects is we make them so, we try and go for, the full thing, and we never actually launch this small thing, which is not a small thing at all. It still takes work, but it's simpler, it achieves its purpose, and guess what? You can get it launched much faster because you're just designing 2 screens. One is like a character with dialogue, and the other one is the choice screen, basically. What do you do, and options. It becomes very simple. What I want you to do is consider that you know, the things that these people are saying, Kelly and James, or in this case, these two lieutenants that were giving Lieutenant Harrell advice. When you're pitching these things, you are totally sometimes making this up, but that's okay. Because, I mean, I've pitched so many projects where the client has thrown all of my scenarios away. That's okay. I haven't invested so much that I get all sensitive about them saying no. What that gives you the opportunity to do is to show them what's possible, show them what you need, and then get them thinking about the right things. They're no longer thinking about the layout or all those things. What they're thinking about is, are these people saying things that actually will resonate with the people who are taking this training? Do people really believe some of these things? You're going to get those from practitioners. You're going to get those from subject matter experts. But in the beginning, don't be afraid to put things here that, you know, that aren't accurate, because that is good. That makes people say, hey, I really need the subject matter experts' help because I'm making up things that don't necessarily resonate, and I'm okay with you throwing this away. I always enter those conversations with stakeholders very, very open-minded, saying, hey, you know what, everything here is, the model is what we're going for because the scenario model works. We're going to have a situation. We're probably going to have maybe some people give advice that's bad and good, and we're also going to show them the consequences. And then let's just work on making sure that this is actually really true to life. And that's it. That's what you've got. So I hope you found this useful. I mean, this is what I do every single week, which is that we look at interactive stories and we see ways that we can leverage and model some of these ideas in our context and in the context of my students' work, but also how do you make this in a way that the end user experience is super valuable, and also that the designer experience is very intuitive, and you don't hate the project because it's so complicated. You can make this, especially, I mean, here I'm going, you know, I'm using storyline kind of layout. You can make this work in PowerPoint. When you look at something like Connect with Haji Kamal, it's really quite simple underneath, because what it does is it says this leads to this, and then this leads to this, and then all of these will lead to, you know, the next situation. You can do this in PowerPoint. You can do this in Articulate Storyline. You can do this in Branch Track. You can do this in Twine, whatever you want. This is not a complicated system. You have to have a plan, though, ahead of time, because I think a lot of times what we do is we start right in the software, and then we don't have a plan, and then it gets away from us. So if you found this useful or exciting, I hope you let me know. Let me know in the comments. A lot of people have questions about how this would apply in their context. Well, what's your context? What do you want to do? Post it in the comments. I'd love to hear how you're trying to approach this, or what ideas you have, because I've seen a ton of projects. I've helped people develop projects. I've developed projects. So if you have anything that you are struggling with as far as how you would be able to apply this, I would love to hear it. Or message me, whatever. Just let's get this, you know, you have the opportunity to help people and help people make better decisions and live better lives. You have an obligation to get your idea out there, because what if you could change a person's life because you did something that maybe made them, help them make better decisions at the snack aisle? Who knows? We all need it. So if this sounded exciting and this is something that you'd enjoy doing basically for the rest of your life, and you want to get really good at this is a skill you got to practice. I think personally that you also get really good at this if you get feedback from people who know what they're talking about. So if you want that kind of feedback and you don't have a community around you of people who are able to give you feedback, some people are solo developers. You just get to see your own work. I look forward to actually seeing you produce what you want to produce after this video. If you have, please share it in the links. I'd love to. But if you want some of that hand holding, if you want some of that back and forth saying, hey, you know, you could fix this, you could improve this, how can we make this a better experience for you next time, then I welcome you to jump on a call with me. I'll put a link to basically it's an application to talk to me. But in the application, what I ask you is like what your goals are, and to tell me a little bit about the project that you're working on. because the idea is to figure out if it's something that I can actually help you with. There's a lot of times where people want to get started with scenarios and they just have trouble contextualizing some of that context. Or what I find is that they get really excited about an idea that they see, but it's hard for them to translate that into something that their stakeholder would actually be like, oh, that's cool. How do we do that? Or how do we not, get overwhelmed with the scope of this project and actually get it completely, actually, do we get to finish this, right? So those are always fears that are coming up. How can I deliver on this? Are we going to finish on this project? Is the stakeholder going to support me? Are they on board with this? Will I get the right people to help me craft these amazing experiences as far as the context and the interviews? So those are all things that we talk about. And if that's something that you really want to pursue after we have the conversation, then you can decide if you want to jump on into our program. Otherwise, that conversation alone is going to be very valuable for you because we really dig into what's holding you back. And I've had people jump on and say, you know what, this is what's holding me back. And I was like, okay, there we go. Look at this. They got the aha just from jumping on the call and having that really candid conversation because, I'm pretty... I'm not intimidating in any way, but I ask you some questions that really get to the root of the problem. And I think sometimes not everybody's ready for it, but when you are, it's an amazing experience for both of us. So I hope you jump on, and regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video. You make sure you leave me a comment, and I will see you next time. All right, take care, friends.